So in the first step of the class, we're going to go through finding inspiration and taking the runway looks and then creating a sketch from them. Whenever it's Fashion Week, which it was just a couple weeks ago, as these shows are happening, you can either live stream and watch them if you can't be at the show, or you can look at them later online. I go through each show one at a time and I pick out my favorite looks. And I think it's really up to you, like what speaks to you the most, what stands out the most. It's just like when you're looking at all of this ocean of fashion, it's just there's always going to be these certain things that just like pop out to you, where you're like, oh, this dress it's super romantic, it's pretty, it would make a beautiful illustration. And that's kind of how my process works. I just really go towards what I'm initially drawn to. And I don't spend too much time looking at each piece. It's just go through it, pick out what stands out the most, and usually your instincts are correct. So for instance, this one, it's striking to me as I would see it in an illustration because it's so simple, it's so elegant and feminine, but it has a lot of detail to it with the texture. And that's something I like to play with in illustrations is texture. Same with this one. It's really simple, but it has texture up top, and it has a really nice flowing bottom. You can play with the folds in the fabric and the sheen of the fabric. This one, it just makes this really beautiful look where it's flowing back and forth, and that's something you can easily capture with watercolor. This Dior look is really striking to me. It's got a really strong silhouette to it. When you're illustrating things like this, you want to over-exaggerate it. This volume in the bottom here, this is something that I would blow out in an illustration because that's what this look is about. It's about the volume on the bottom here and the pattern play. And then on the top, it's just super simple. It's sheer, which is something you can also play with on an illustration. But yeah, it's pieces like that that really stand out to me. I always stick with this one paper. I think there are other papers that are nice out there, and there are cheaper versions which are fine for starting out and illustrating. But I prefer this, which is the Aquarelle Arches. It's a really, really nice watercolor block paper. I take these images and I make them digital afterwards, so it's really important for me to have a smooth finish on it for when I'm scanning. So I get the grain satin. And if you have the rougher watercolor paper, it's really hard to scan. I mean, I can scan it and there's going to be bumps everywhere and the coloring is going to be inconsistent, so that's something that personally works for me. Alright, so when I first started sketching, I do use mechanical pencils a lot, which isn't taught in school to use mechanical pencils when you're illustrating just because of the line weight, but I just love the quick, not having to sharpen your pencil and just get the sketch out. So it's great for that. But if I'm doing something that you're gonna see the sketch a lot more, or it's gonna show through, or it's more artistic, I would use a real artist pencil. And I tend to use softer leads because it's just really easy to make a nice line with this. So I usually go with a 2B or a 3B. After you sketch, sometimes we'll go through this later, but you maybe press down too hard or your sketch is too dark. So I do like to go in and lighten it up a bit. This is just a rubber kneaded eraser, and it really picks up graphite really well. Same for this. This one you could use for details erasing, or you could just, like, the same way as this, you can kind of wipe it over your drawing just to pick up some excess pencil. So I'm going to start by illustrating this Dior look, and you don't necessarily need to start by doing the same pose that's already on here. I'm going to do a side view just to show the volume a little bit more. So when you start sketching, you want to start kind of towards the top with the head, And make sure you're holding your pencil really loosely and not getting too tight with it. So I'm just gonna start really lightly and just do a head, and you just want to get a really basic shape down without thinking too much about it, and really overemphasize the fact that her skirt is giant. I usually add circles where her joints are, so like her shoulder and then her elbow, and emphasize her waist. When you're doing the bottom of a skirt or something with kind of a flowy fabric look, you want to kind of do a basic shape and then go back after and kind of give it a little more movement, but keep it really loose and light again, and don't think too much about doing a perfect line and a perfect drawing right away. And then I'm going to go back and put some folds in the fabric. So I'm going to add a little more detail to her face, and then as you're adding hair and things like that, don't think too much, be really simple with it, just because this sort of sketch is about the dress and you really want to just focus on that mostly. So for the hair, I'm just going to do a simple bun type thing. And then it's a good thing to remember is when you use a harder line weight, you want to do it where her weight is going. So for instance, she's sort of like leaning backwards a bit as she's going forward. So adding the darker lines on her back kind of let you see that visually. So even here, the weight on the skirt is towards the bottom. So you add a little bit of darker lines there, and it gives that illusion of the weight being on the skirt. And for the feet, you don't really need to show too much. I mean, it's kind of nice when there's not too much detail in there, just hint towards a foot. For the pattern, same thing, you don't want to be too detailed with it. You just want to be really loose, just a hint towards there being a floral pattern on there. So now that we have a pretty basic sketch down and it's loosely done, you want to make sure you have it looking how you want. If you don't, you can always start over. When you're looking to do a pose, really think about the garment that you're illustrating and what's most important about it and what you want to show in it. So like I said before, I did this on a side view because this skirt is the most important thing, and you really want to show that, and a side view kind of illustrates the fact that it's so wide, so huge, and that the top of her is really fitted and small. Alright, so now we have a sketch and it's pretty much finished, but now I'm going to get it ready for the next step. So I'm going to take my kneaded eraser, just because some of my lines are a little bit darker than I want, and a good way to lighten it up a little bit for the watercolor is just sort of like roll your eraser over your drawing where it's a little bit dark, or just like dab it a bit, and it picks up some of that graphite. If you don't have a kneaded eraser, you can always use a more standard eraser, kind of like this, and just kind of lightly rub it over the surface, and it will do the same thing and pick up that graphite. So then your sketch is pretty much ready now to add color to.